Self-care totally went out the window. I could no longer work. I could no longer explain what was going on. I felt very dark, in a dark place. I isolated myself totally from everything. I was a senior manager, so I continued to get paid, under the insurance, but they put me on the shelf and literally forgot about me, which, as far as anxiety, was absolutely dreadful. When I first started having the issues, pull yourself together, that was the classic sort of thing. You're a man, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, or whatever.
Hello, my name's Charlie, the founder of Livedinsights, and welcome to the Livedinsights Podcast. We're going to be having conversations with many different people on many different topics to get their insights, their experiences, their knowledge, their wisdom to help other people. Please tell friends, tell family, tell colleagues, and without further ado, let's crack on with this episode. This episode, we're going to be talking about depression and anxiety. And my guest today is Dave.
Hello,
Hi,
Charlie.
Dave.
Hello, Charlie.
So, depression, anxiety. Can I ask you, have you been formally diagnosed with those conditions?
Very interesting question. Yes, I have been diagnosed with a couple of different mental health conditions over the years. You could say that my initial one, which was severe depression, maybe it was a misdiagnosis, which I'm sure we'll talk about during the course of the next few minutes. But yeah, and I've had a diagnosis more recently, which is actually my genuine mental health condition.
Okay, so you said you potentially were misdiagnosed a while ago, and you've recently had a diagnosis that you feel is more accurate.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that, please?
I thought that would puzzle you. So when I was 18, I had the first symptoms of depression.
Okay.
Or what I felt with depression, and that was the first time I went to get medical assistance.
And when you say symptoms,
Yep.
what were your symptoms?
So my symptoms were unable to communicate. Self-care totally went out the window. I could no longer work. I could no longer explain what was going on. I felt very dark, in a dark place. I isolated myself totally from everything, shut myself away, and wanted to cut myself off from the world.
And did you recognise that at the time?
No, because first time I didn't have a clue what was going on, because it was all new to me. It was all different. And I did reflect back at the time, have I had this during childhood? Have I had sort of examples of this? Is this within my DNA and what have you? But no, I didn't know what was going on, to be perfectly frank, because we're talking about when I was 18, so that's a long time ago.
I was going to say that.
You were going to say I'm an old man, but it was a long time ago, and maybe things like depression, certainly for men and young men, was sort of hidden under the carpet. We're not supposed to have those feelings and what have you. So the other thing as well, going back to what you just said, there was an awful lot of stigma attached at that time.
Sure.
So didn't know what was going on, didn't want to admit what was going on. So the response was to hide away. Okay. And that's what I did.
Okay. For how long?
So my first episode, so I could no longer work. So I was signed off with depression at the time. That's what the label was. And I was off work for 3 months probably. Okay.
And then you went back and nothing had changed, or had things improved?
Well, it took a lot of courage to go back. Again, the stigma thing was huge. I went back to the same company that I was working with. They were very good. Part of my stress bucket that was filling up was I was in a totally inappropriate job.
Okay.
I know you're great with numbers. I'm not. So after school, I was put into a role that was sort of not accountancy, but sort of secretarial based, and I just couldn't cope with it. And that was one of the things that I couldn't cope with. I'd just done my A-levels, and I'm someone that's very studious, so I locked myself away during that. Okay. There's a sign there that maybe that was part of the depression, coping anxiety, just to lock myself away. And my stress bucket got full, and it was just overloaded.
Okay. And how long did that continue for? Especially given you didn't understand.
Yeah, so I felt a little bit stronger, and again, I expect you'll ask me about what support I got in a minute. But I was able to go back to work, and my employer were very good. They found me a different role, so it's a different role that was maybe more suited to me. And with hindsight, I wish they'd done that up front. But And I settled back in, still in not a great place, still couldn't communicate with people, still another thing, my cognition seems to go, I can't learn things, so it was very embarrassing that I had to go over and over and over to learn the job role. And then eventually I came out of it, so you'll probably ask me how long that took, probably another 6 months. And then the other condition that I've subsequently been diagnosed with, which I knew I had, but I was never diagnosed with, my bipolar kicked in. So therefore, after that period, I started showing the signs of bipolar, which I didn't realise was bipolar at the time. But then I started conquering the world. I started doing an awful lot, I had an awful lot of energy, and the people that would have seen me would have seen a completely different me, and that's the two sides of bipolar. And
you talked about a more recent diagnosis.
Yeah.
Is that the bipolar?
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is you suspect you've had bipolar for a very long time.
Yeah.
And therefore you'd have periods of everything's great.
Yeah.
Full on energy, accomplishments, all good. And then periods of complete opposite.
Totally.
Okay.
So an obvious question is, well, why that diagnosis? And I simply put it like this. When I'm taking on the world, when I'm full of energy, when I'm climbing mountains, when I'm running marathons, and I phone up the doctor and say, can I come and see you? I'm not feeling quite right. Well, I'm not going to get an appointment if I'm on top of the world. So therefore, I only presented myself to the medics when I was on a downer.
Okay.
And then I couldn't communicate because, as I said earlier, that's one of the first things that goes. So therefore, they just saw this depressed lump sitting inside of them, in front of them. So therefore, they would go down the route of medication, referral to a mental health team or whatever. And that wasn't the problem that needed to be addressed. And therefore, any medication just didn't work because I was allocated the medication, depressive medication.
Okay, that makes sense. So what were you? You were given medication for depression.
Yep.
And that didn't help, and it was more of a natural cycle of the bipolar that brought you up.
Yeah. It was,
and that was deemed to be successful because you're now in a better place.
Well, to get back into that, if I can think back to the first sort of episode, it was a passage of time. Okay. It literally was a passage of time that, over that year or whatever that I started. It's interesting to say, I don't believe you get better. Bipolar is a lifelong condition. I know I've got it for life. It's not like it just passes by. And the medication, as I say, wasn't right because it was a depressive medication, and it was just a passage of time. I got my confidence back. I was in the right working environment. I was making friendships again and that sort of thing. And it's just a natural consequence of doing all those things around the support that you get. But still wasn't a thing that was discussed really. It was just, I was off for 3 months or whatever it was, and no one really asked too many questions for the reason they didn't know what questions to ask.
So, if I get this right, most of your adult life, you've had bipolar disorder, and it's mainly been viewed as you having episodes of depression.
Yep.
And it's only fairly recently that this now makes sense, as in it's bipolar.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? As in, you spent all your adult life kind of not knowing, not understanding, kind of dealing with the ups and downs of that.
How do I feel about it? I don't look backwards with regret. That I've had a very, very good life, but yes, I've had times when they've been really, 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 really down. I mean, I've been severe depression, and that's not good, but it's a learning opportunity for me. And I look back at that now and think that's what's made me the man I am today. So, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but it's helped me understand myself better, to help understand others better. And then I'm now at the stage where I want to give back and help people to understand, hence the reason why I'm here with you today.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I probably should mention this now, as in, with Lived Insights and the topics we talk about, there are some topics that I have no personal experience of, and I'm keen to understand and to learn. And there's some topics I do have experience of, and depression is a topic I have experience of. I've talked about it for many years, and I set up a charity around that, and I've done a lot with regard to depression particularly. And for me, this was 20 years ago, period of a few years, sort of 2003, for several years. And like what you mentioned before, huge stigma attached. I didn't understand anything about it, didn't want to talk about it, admit to it, didn't know who I could talk to. And it was only sort of several years later that I, through various things that happened, became knowledgeable. I came across a book that resonated, then another book, and started reading and researching. And from about 2008, I suddenly had all this information and knowledge and understanding, and it all made sense, and then I could do something about it. How recently were you in that position where it started to make sense, and therefore you could do something about it?
So if I go back a little bit, so you were saying you were able to do the research, I wasn't able to pick up a book. I wasn't able to do that. It just wasn't something that my negative mindset would even have considered or been capable of doing, and that was one of the symptoms of my illness. As far as when did it actually trigger, when did it actually the right diagnosis? It was very, very recently, and it was through private consultation rather than through the NHS, because as far as the NHS records were concerned, I was a severe depressive. And that's the only time when I presented myself to the medics. I knew there was more to it, and because I had private medical insurance, I went to an expert, and they diagnosed it like that. And therefore, the brilliant thing was my GP was really, really good. She was totally open to it, and she took the advice from the specialist, and therefore I've been appropriately treated since and medicated since, and I've been even for 4 or 5 years since lockdown. Really, that's when it all started. Getting back on the straight and narrow.
Okay. I mean, you touched upon a few things there regarding diagnosis, getting support, getting help, understanding, what it actually is and what can then be done about it. If you came across someone, let's say you came across yourself 10, 20 years ago, and they talk to you, what advice would you give them? Because the standard advice is go and see your doctor.
Yep.
What's your view on that?
Okay. My view would be straight away, don't give any unsolicited advice to people, because that's always very tough to receive, and we always look at that through our own set of lenses, and we're not actually standing in the other person's shoes. So rather than advice, just be there with support. And also asking what support someone means when they're depressed. They don't know what support they need, because they don't think that way. They can't think of improvement. They can't think of getting out of the hole that they're in if they're in the bottom of the hole. So sometimes, if I go back to my friends, for example, they would just send me a card, say, thinking of you. They wouldn't send a card saying, oh, can we meet up next week because you need cheering up or something like that, because that's the last thing that you need to have. So going back to your question about the GP, that is always the first point of reference, yes. What I believe is probably the first thing to help people do is self-care. So if I was sitting here during a depressive episode, literally I'll be dressed all in black. I know we are a little bit in black for the benefit of the cameras, but I would be all in black, baggy clothes. I'd have long, unkempt hair. I'd be unshaven. That self-care just completely goes. Okay. Showering, washing, don't do it, because it's too much effort to actually do it.
Right.
So that would be what I would probably try and help people with to start about, maybe a little bit
and
of self-care.
And is that also, in terms of going out, being reclusive, so...
Totally.
You would try and get them outside?
Not necessarily. So I know we're here to talk about anxiety as well, but the linkage with my depression was social anxiety.
Okay.
So going out was a really, really big issue for me, and I really, really struggled with it. I could go out the door, but it was the contact, having any contact with anybody for the fear of them talking to me and asking me questions which I didn't want to answer or wasn't capable of answering.
Okay.
So getting them out, yes, is great, but if that involves social contact for me, that would have been a no-no. And also the energy levels just weren't there. So I would often go out, for example, go out for a walk, and then I'd just sit on the nearest bench because I just could not be bothered to walk. It was too much effort, and I would just sit there and just vegetate for an hour and then come back and pretend I'd had a walk.
Okay, so let's touch on some more of those symptoms or behaviours when you're in a depressive state. So there's depression and there's bipolar, and they're two different. Even the depression within bipolar, would you say is different from depression, or can you not answer that because
I can answer it. I don't want to get too technical about bipolar, but there are a number of different versions of bipolar.
Okay.
So I'm diagnosed as bipolar 2, and bipolar 2 is I don't go to the extremes of suicidal thoughts to voices in my head, which is the extreme versions of bipolar.
Okay.
I'm bipolar 2, and bipolar 2 tends to be the depressive episodes are longer.
Okay.
Rather than the more towards the mania side. So that's the sort of bipolar that I have. So that's very easy to see why it will get misdiagnosed as as depression in the first instance. It's still depression,
mm-hmm.
but it's just part of the bipolar 2.
Okay, so how do you deal with those episodes now? Now that you've got the knowledge, understanding, etc.
So now I'm medicated, so I've got an even mood. So I now have that even mood.
Are there side effects with?
I've not had any. So
Okay.
that's the real benefit of them, and I accept that medication does have side effects, and they're different for different people.
Sure.
Aren't they? So some work for some don't for others. As far as what I've done, it's all about what I call a whole life balance. So when you're in bad places or in high places, everything balance goes out the window.
Okay.
So it's a matter of keeping that in check. So I journal and things like that. I use a whole life balance, a wheel of life, whatever tool you want to call it, just to check in on myself. I've also had really good discussions with my really close group of friends, and they check in on me. So I've explained the condition to them. So, and that's one of the things you were talking about, how to communicate with people. That's what I've tried to do with them, rather than them not understanding or not knowing what to do. I've given them my coping strategy.
Okay.
So if you ever notice this, can you please check in with me? So silly little example. So if I'm not in contact with you for a month, can you just check in?
Right.
And they do.
Okay.
If it ever happens. Or if my bipolar at the top end starts kicking in, they'll notice it as well, and they'll feed back. And that's what I want from friends and family, that I've tried to educate them, and you said this earlier, it's about I've done lots of research into it. I'm really fascinated by the way the brain works, and I've shared that knowledge, and I think that's a major part of it, to help your friends understand and your support to understand, rather than expecting them to know what to do. Yeah. So it's sharing my coping strategy with them, and that's what I've been able to do.
Okay, and when you come out of the depressive state into I'm not sure what the right word for it is, but a more
manic
energetic
state. Just call it that's what it's called.
Okay, manic state,
yeah.
Which I'm assuming is a much better place to be compared to the depressive state. Would that be fair?
Not necessarily.
No. So how can you explain the differences?
So if I can, so Bipolar UK, who are very, very good, very supportive. I'd recommend anybody that might be feeling they might have bipolar, or if they've got somebody that they feel might have bipolar, check in there first. Okay. That's the first place to check. So they have a scale from 0 to 10, and starting with suicidal thoughts at the bad end of depression, up to hearing voices in the head, which is the mania stage. Just because it sounds like the top end is going to be better, it ain't.
Right.
So if you can imagine, Charlie, I come on one of your walks every week, and I want to beat you up the top of the mountain every week. That's a sign. That's not healthy. Okay. If I start running marathons every weekend, that's not a good sign. That's not healthy. If I start spending loads of money, if I start giving you 50 quid every time I see you, you'd love it. But that's not a good sign. So that's often a symptom of bipolar, is that you lose all respect for money, and you just spend it either on yourself or on others. So there's all these little signs, and they're not great. So therefore, going back to the scale, I try and live my life on 4, 5, 6, which is the green zone in the middle. Constant. Then I'd check in with myself. So again, journaling. I'll regularly check in with myself each month.
So very self-aware.
And I can recognise the symptoms, and really a lot of it is getting to know yourself.
Can you recognise triggers as to what what potential triggers are there each way? So
the triggers would be the stress bucket, as I call it. So, I mean, I literally have a visualisation of one of those old metal buckets with lots of water going in the top. And if I don't find a way to release that, and the way I visualise that is punching lots of small holes in the side of the bucket. So as the stress is going in, it's permanently coming out. So things that work for different people. So exercise is great. Outdoor living for me is great. When I'm able to do it, meeting with friends when I'm able to do it is great. They're all little things that relieve my stress, and that's how I keep an even mood now.
Okay.
I've actually written a coping strategy for myself when I'm in a good place to do it. When I'm severely depressed, I wouldn't even pick a pin up or turn the computer
when you
on.
are in those depressive states, you're aware of that? Yeah. Do you do any things particularly to try and get you back up again, or you just sort of ride it out?
I'm not capable of doing it.
Okay.
So I can't get out of bed.
So you don't know whether it's going to be 2 days, a week, 2 months?
I know from my record, my past, Charlie, that it's going to be a long time.
I hope you're finding this episode interesting, informative and beneficial. And if so, please like, comment, subscribe, follow, and keep watching and listening to future episodes. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues. Also, if you can, go to the livedinsights.com website and fill in an online questionnaire. You'll be helping so many other people understand more about these different topics and issues. So remember, tune in to Lived Insights, the conversation, and the website. Thank you.
I'm not a depressive that can, it lasts literally. So my last episode before I got to know you, Charlie, 10 years. I was off work for 8 years. My work forgot all about me, which was a bit bizarre. So it was good in a way that, I was a senior manager, so I continued to get paid, under the insurance. But they put me on the shelf and literally forgot about me, which, as far as anxiety, was absolutely dreadful, because every time my insurance money came in each month, I didn't want to spend a penny, because my illogical brain was telling me they're going to come back and ask all of this because I'm a fraud.
Okay.
So I wouldn't go out because I was a working age. I'd think people would be looking at me, why aren't you at work? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, sorry, I can't remember what question you asked me. How I got onto that, but
no, it's more about recognising or what you can do, recognising you're in a particular state and what you can do about it.
Couldn't do anything when you were on a downer. I couldn't do anything. The one thing I did know, though, because this has happened all my life, I knew I would get over it. Mm-hmm. So I knew it would pass. I didn't know when. Okay. I didn't know what event might happen that could trigger me to be back on the road to recovery. I just knew it would happen.
Stress was the primary reason or trigger. Yeah. And you do as much as you can to reduce the stress.
Do now.
The bucket. Yeah. Well, do now. Now that you know, of course. And this is all about people with experience as to what can be done to improve the situation for others and for people to understand as well. Yeah. And I mean, I could talk for hours on this subject in terms of my experience and not so much about bipolar, but depression and stress. But I find that interesting that you say that you really can't do much about it when you're in that position, and it's all about trying to stop you getting in that position in the first place.
Totally, it's prevention rather than cure.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer, or better way of putting it is, I know that I'm susceptible to becoming depressed because of what I've been through and my past depression. So it's not like it's all just disappeared. It's about managing it, about understanding, recognising it. And I have this thing called the spiral of decline, where things might happen, you start to go down, and it's so easy to keep going
Of course it is.
further down.
Yeah.
And I'm very good, and have been for years now, of recognising when I'm starting to go down and doing anything and everything just to stop that and to manage it. So it's like a continuous way of living to make sure that I'm a bit like, the self-awareness, but I feel very, very confident that I'm able to manage that. So that I can't go down. Whereas it seems like in your situation,
couldn't do it.
It's very different.
Because it's all about self-care, and I couldn't be bothered. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of that. When I'm in a low point, I'm just a piece of dirt. I'm not worthy of that self-investment. And that's what that to me is. It's self-investment. Now I totally understand the theory. I've read every book on it back when I was 18, 19, 20, when it first occurred to me. But that just goes out the window.
Okay.
You can have all the education, you can have all the learning, but when you're in a downer, none of it's relevant.
Yeah.
You have to be in the right place, and that's the key thing.
Sure.
You have to be in the right place. So it's, for example, I was sent to see psychiatrists, therapists, and all that sort of thing. Again, when you're in a really, really low place, you're not listening. You can't communicate, or I can't. So it didn't do me any good at all.
And do you live in a constant, almost fear of going to that place again?
Not a fear. I know I will be. So it's a realism that, as I say, my condition is a lifelong condition. And if you do research on it, you'll see that it's a lifelong condition. I know it's going to come back. What I'm now wiser at is I've got a coping strategy to deal with it. I've we talk about the toolbox, don't we? So I've now created my own toolbox with lots of little coping mechanisms in it, and it's up to me to recognise to use the right tool at the right time, which I'm now becoming skilled at. But it'll come back. I'll slip into a hole again, and I just hope it won't be as deep as it has been in the past.
Okay, let's go deep down then. So, in terms of your lowest situation, suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
Tell me about your experience with that, if you don't mind, and I'll tell you about mine.
Okay. So thoughts and actions are two completely different things. Never put anything into place.
Yeah.
And I won't bore you as to why. But the thoughts, yes, they were regularly like, I've not got a place on this earth. Why am I here? I regret ever being born. I'd much rather, it'd be much easier that I didn't wake up in the morning, and I always wanted it to happen naturally rather than me having to take any action because people that actually, I hate it when people say, it's the coward's way out. It takes huge strength to do that. Huge strength to actually take an action that's going to do. I was never, if we want to use the phrase brave enough, I was never brave enough to do it. And the only thing that kept me going was feeling for my family and the consequences of them having to live with it, and the stigma again at that time. So it was lack of self-worth really, and not wanting to be here, and thinking that every day is a pointless day, not wanting to wake up and seeing the negative in absolutely everything, because that's another thing we haven't really talked about. But the negative mindset kicks in. It's literally, people talk about the black dog, didn't they? Yeah, Churchill called it his black dog, and that is what it was like for me. It was just, everything was just a black cloud. Okay.
And are you expecting that to come back at some point in the future?
Yeah.
As part of that depressive
part
episode?
Of the bipolar, but not to that degree.
Okay.
Because I will recognise when it's coming, and it will happen.
Yeah.
But it's recognising when it comes and then trying to minimise the impact of it through the coping skills and the toolbox and all that sort of thing.
I wasn't really expecting to talk about suicide particularly in this, but I think it's really important because, we know, and I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening know, that particularly male suicide is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth talking about, having a couple of minutes talking about that, because sadly there'll be people, today, tomorrow, next week. I think there's figures are over 5,000 men in the UK,
especially in younger men in the 20s. It's frightening. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I believe it's most ages, 20s, 30s, 40s. and it's a real issue. And statistically, you know, it's 75% men, 25% women, and there's lots of reasons for all of that.
Yep.
And a few months back, somebody I knew took their own life, and on paper they had it all. They had the money, they had the family, they had the job, they had the career, they had all. And sadly, they took their own life. And you hear stories of this all the time. And for most people, they can't comprehend it. They just can't get their head around why would they do that, particularly if someone's in a situation where they believe they're in a good place. And the amount of times you hear, well, I've no idea. If only, you know, if only I knew, I could have helped. And it's firstly like, well, how do you know? Secondly, how could you help? And thirdly, what can be done about suicide? Because sadly, the reality is it's been around forever and it will continue to be around. But if there are things we can do, then it's important to discuss them. And I've had suicidal thoughts, like yourself, never actioned it. But I have an understanding of what it feels like not to want to live, and to think about what would you do and all the consequences of that. And obviously you've had the same. So what's your view around suicide? What can be done? How to deal with it? What would you advise, etc.? Because so that you may, by saying something here, you may potentially prevent some people taking that action.
So what I'd say about that is almost asking for help. So there's so Samaritans have got a helpline. Most mental health charities have got a helpline that you can ring if you feel able, and it's almost like putting yourself out, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, recognising that you're in a bad place. But I know this is going to sound a bit fatalistic, but if you're going to do it, you will do it. If you feel that determined to do it. Again, there's nothing worse than people saying, well, you've got all this to live for, you've got this. And that example you gave there of outward appearances, they're all material things. And that's somebody else judging you and not knowing the real you, what's actually burning inside of you. Maybe because you haven't been able to communicate it. Maybe because you're hiding behind those possessions because you believe that society thinks you'll be happy if you've got a good job, a nice car, a nice family. And going back to causes, that's one of my issues, is that when I've coming out of depression, I'm going into bipolar, I go and get the big car, I go and get the big house, I go and find the attractive partner, etc., which all puts stresses on you as well, and because that's not me. Ultimately, that doesn't make me happy. It's a horrible thing. Talking is great to help you. I mean, I don't know whether you saw Bon Jovi recently on the episode when he was filming a video on the bridge. Was it Brooklyn or something?
No, I saw that.
And somebody was there going to take their own life, and literally he played it perfectly. Just went up there, was there for them. Didn't say anything, ended up giving her a big hug and getting her away. Better than any of his records he's ever produced. That's the greatest thing he's ever done for mankind. He helped save your life. Yeah. And just be there for people. That's what I'd say. Yeah. Don't have to talk. Yeah. Presence is a wonderful, wonderful thing to help people that are in a bad place.
And the reality is, a lot of men particularly won't ask for help, won't reach out. And therefore, it can be very difficult to be there for someone if you don't know. So
what I'd say on that is, again, society is getting a lot better now.
Sure.
So there are things. So, for example, in the charities that I work with, Bipolar UK and Mind, they have men-only groups. So they have peer support groups that men can come along to. You've probably heard of Men in Sheds. There's things like that, which is a very and men, even though they might not talk about their feelings, they can go and be in company, they can go and be in a community in a shed making something, and then they don't have to talk about the issue in kind. They're just doing something constructive. They're doing something with an end product that can say, we've actually worked together on this, and then communication does start, but they don't have to talk about the issue in question. And all that helps your self-esteem, helps your confidence and what have you.
Yeah. Okay.
And it takes some nerve to go and walk in one of those places for the first time. And that's what I mean about feel the fear and do it anyway. Mm-hmm. I've often done it and walked straight out because I haven't been able to do it. But at the time you beat yourself up for that. But then I look back at it now and think that was really brave to even get over the door.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay. I mean, my take we could spend a lot of time on this, but generally speaking, it's trying to get across that what they're feeling and thinking at that time is temporary. You have to try and make it that yes, that's how you feel right now, but in a few days, weeks, months, it will be different, and you just got to hold on. There's lots of things you could do to help, but recognising it's temporary as opposed to...
And on the back of that as well, Charlie, is be kind to yourself. So don't beat yourself up the fact you're feeling like that. It's almost like acknowledging it. So I now am able to acknowledge it because I know it's going to pass, as you've just said. And that's the key thing, is to be kind to yourself. Okay, this is a temporary feeling, as you're saying. I know it's going to pass, and in the meantime, let's not make it even worse by beating myself up.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying around suicide is nowadays there's a lot more support out there.
Yes.
So go and seek that support. Go and seek that help. Talk. Admit the issues. That's the best thing you can do. Yeah. In my situation 20 years ago, there was a lot less support. The stigma was much, much higher. It was, in the environment I sort of was in, it's the last thing you would admit to. Thankfully, things have changed a lot and improved a lot, and there's a lot more knowledge, understanding, less stigma, etc. So the advice would be to go and seek that help and talk and recognise it's temporary.
But you might not know what it is. That's the thing. You might not know what it is. All you know is that you're not feeling quite right.
Yeah.
Going back to how things have changed, I couldn't agree more. So, for example, there are wellbeing officers in workplaces now. There are helplines that people can phone up that are confidential that are provided by big employers. So all those sorts of things now, I think, do help the situation. And I think employers are becoming more aware of it. So, I mean, that going back historically, that was one of the things that I did. So in the company that I worked for, they were like you, I had a similar career to you. They were a big company. And I actually suggested I could go in and speak to the management teams and say, could I come in and actually help people recognise the signs in their staff? So we worked in this this sort of yuppie environment where everybody was macho, everybody had to drive for performance and things. And actually to recognise the signs or the pressure that you might be putting your staff under, or that they're accepting, that might tip them over the edge, and that's not in anybody's interest. That staff are off ill, or that environment is being one that is being put forward as the healthy environment, because it's not. So I did that. I went and spoken to all the managers, and it was very well received. Hopefully they were able to put some of the things in place. But then obviously it happened to me a number of times since. So it was almost like I wasn't listening to my own mantra, but I wasn't capable of, and that's the reality of it.
Okay. The behaviours, symptoms, how you felt, etc. You talked about in terms of the bipolar. There are different coping mechanisms. The way I look at it, people use. Some are going to be very helpful, help you cope.
Yep.
Others you think will help and really don't. Yep. So in my case, I was kind of... I understood that alcohol wasn't going to be helpful, wasn't going to be the answer, wasn't going to be any good for me. And so I did not go down the route of drinking and alcohol. I didn't do drugs. And basically, I was very good at not doing additional things that would make the situation worse, which is very helpful. In your case, did you succumb to things that weren't going to be good for you?
This might sound funny, but I just succumbed to junk food.
Okay.
No, I'm like you. I don't like the taste of alcohol particularly. I wouldn't even know where to get drugs. So it was the self-care thing for me.
Okay.
I just and comfort food, sugar intakes. It was a boost. It gave me energy that I didn't have, but it's all very temporary, and then it has a very adverse effect on how, because I'm like you, a guy that likes exercise on the whole, and it just made me feel even worse about myself, which is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to feel good about myself, so junk food was the way around it, and also it was so easy. to get hold of and get. You don't want to go through the hassle or the energy of having to cook a meal. It's too much effort.
Yeah.
It's far easier to go and buy a pack of biscuits and then sort of exist on that.
And also, we now know much more than we used to that the effects of the junk food, the sugar, all the
fat, the
rubbish
salt,
you're putting into your body, that
totally
really doesn't help.
Totally.
In terms of mental health.
No.
Okay, well that's interesting, and I think you can understand why people reach out for.
Totally.
It's to
try and numb the pain,
drugs,
isn't it? That's all this pain, and it does numb the pain for a short period of time, but it's not long term. And as you say, going back to what you said earlier, Charlie, about the downward spiral, to me, that's all part of the downward spiral. That
just accelerates it.
Yeah, totally. And I know I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But it's just instant relief, and then afterwards you don't feel particularly. That guilt thing kicks in. And then that makes you feel even more depressed when you get that guilt thing kicking in that I shouldn't really be doing this. But I'm doing it temporarily to make myself.
And so when you go into depressive states now, do you expect you will then?
Yeah, that's one of my my warning signs when I start going for the biscuits. And the biscuits is just and that's when I have to check myself and say, okay, that's not good. It's far better for me to go out for a walk. And I do that rather than. So if you ever see me on one of your walks eating a packet of biscuits, that's a sign.
Okay. So what should I do?
Have a chat.
Okay.
And highlight.
It's interesting because I knew a little bit about, let's call it your mental health condition. Pretty much every time I've seen you, and over the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen you fairly regularly, both on the mountain coach hikes and also climbing a mountain. You've always come across very positive, smiley, almost sort of reassuring, and with your business as a coach, it's like you always say the right things. And anybody who was making a judgment about you, and I think we're all guilty of making judgments, you'd be the last person they would think to have these issues.
I've heard that a lot in my life.
Yeah.
So people that I meet that I've known for a short period of time, and they've only seen, because I wouldn't be on your walks if I wasn't in a fairly good place, because I wouldn't be able to get there or whatever. So I've heard that a lot. Wouldn't have believed you would have been that. And then I'm saying, well, if you saw me, so lockdown was a big thing for me, and maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you saw me at the end of 4 or 5, 6 years ago, no, you wouldn't recognise me. I certainly wouldn't be here now doing this.
Yeah.
So,
to me particularly, because I've come to know you more, it's just really interesting. And there's an aspect there where I think there's some similarities where what you're doing and how you talk to other people and doing this and the work you do with climbing mountain, you're looking to help other people.
And that's the stage when I think you get to, you want to give back. So I do lots of other things for other organisations because they value, a bit like you do with this, they value the feedback, they value input from people that have had first-hand or second-hand experience. And you and I have had first-hand experience. Our friends and partners or whatever may have had second-hand experience, but it's just as important that they get the support, even more so, I believe, because when you're in the depths of it, and you don't give a monkeys about anything. You're very insular thinking, and those people actually probably have it worse than you do when you're in the depths of it. So again, the organisations like mine and Bipolar are very good at supporting family members and friends as well.
But why do you want to help other people?
Why now?
Yeah.
Because this sounds really cliche, but I don't want people to have the life that I've lived to a degree. Without the coping mechanisms. So that's what I'm trying to help people with is building up the toolbox.
Do you also think that with what you're doing to help other people, there's a little bit that rubs off on you,
totally.
So it helps you
help
yourself more?
I mean, you said I'm a coach, I am a coach, a life coach, but everybody has to have a motivation for doing something or they wouldn't do it. My motivation is to assist others assist themselves. That's my strapline. I don't help people. I assist people assist themselves. So by giving them the tools, by helping them understand themselves
You
better.
also need to make sure that you listen to your own advice.
I do now.
You do now.
So because I've got the
Yeah.
support network now,
Yeah.
and I regularly talk to people. And obviously, being a coach, I hear a lot of people's barriers and what have you. So, I mean, the coaching community is pretty strong. So we have regular get-togethers and we help each other and that sort of thing. So it's important. I mean, again, I call that peer support, and I think peer support is vital. So if you're going into, so mine, for example, run great peer support groups, everybody in there has got some sort of been impacted by mental health. So therefore it's more of a safe environment rather than talking to a bunch of strangers down the pub. That's going to be not particularly helpful to you, but being in with a group of people that have had similar experiences is really, I find it's really supportive and helpful.
Let's then, this could be interesting again, let's talk about or mention the sort of things that people say or do that aren't helpful. Okay. So, you know, I mean, we've both been there.
Yeah.
And yeah, people who, you know, the comment is, oh, just pull yourself together or just get on with it. Or let's talk about some of the things that people really shouldn't be saying or doing.
So the one you've just said was the when I first started having the issues, pull yourself together. You know, that was the classic sort of thing. You're a man. You know, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that, or whatever. So those things obviously are never helpful. As I said earlier, giving unsolicited advice is not helpful because people aren't standing in our shoes or my shoes or your shoes or whoever. Never give unsolicited advice. Also, forcing people to do things. So that's one of the. So if I can go back to the medical profession, I was referred to CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, all the time because that's the current buzz thing. Never worked for me because I wasn't in the right place to receive it. I knew I would be at one point, so I kept all the notes. And I still use those today as coaching tools and various other things. So it's almost like forcing people. Don't force people down any route. And if people say to you, oh, come out for a drink or something, that's not always helpful. Love the gesture, love the thought behind it. Yeah. But so my key point to answer your question is don't force your view of depression onto somebody else because it's a very personal thing. Yes, we can read all the textbooks, the very sweeping generalisations about things, but it affects everybody differently.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree. Also, though, I would say that one thing that frustrates me is, so in a good way, we all know over the last several years, the stigma's been reduced, more people are talking about it, there's more information, there's more knowledge, all good. With that, though, comes people, saying they're depressed when it's essentially just a natural reaction to something that's not particularly enjoyable or good or something sad. It's a natural reaction. It's not depression. But they use that in a way that isn't helpful. And secondly, people go, I'm depressed. And they may be depressed, but then it's, what are you doing about it? What support is there? What are you doing to help yourself in that situation? Because just saying you're depressed and just staying there isn't helpful for that person particularly, but for anybody. So it's like trying to get a balance between all the good stuff that is there now against, well, you've got to do something, or you've got to be aware that just saying I've got depression isn't the end of it.
Yeah, it's like anything in life. And again, going back to my business, I help people take action. If they don't take action, they'll stay where they are. Mm-hmm. If they don't take action, they'll stay in the blockage they've got in their life or whatever. Some people choose to be there. Some people choose to, like you've heard of the comfort zone, and to move to any growth zone, you need to go through the fear zone. And when you're in a really bad place, the comfort zone is where you want to stay. The bed is the obvious example. You just want to stay wrapped up in the bed, away from the outside world, which is threatening, but that's not helpful. It might be on a short term. So I use an example of, so you've had a few bad weeks and you want to sit on the sofa. If you do it for one weekend, that's fine. But if you find yourself doing it a lot, that's a sign straight away that you maybe need to start addressing the causes of what are actually making you be in that situation. So short-term comfort zone's great, but when it becomes a constant, then maybe you need to start addressing it.
Yeah. Okay. And again, everyone's situation is different, whether it's partners, family, they've got children, they're financially different, work, career, etc. And you mentioned your employment, your company, and the not so good situation there. What do you think could be done to improve the situation for companies, for employees, etc., when it comes to depression, anxiety, bipolar? Because it feels like everyone does loads of things and they all look after their staff and there's all this access to everything, but the rates are higher than ever.
What I'd say to that, Charlie, is to go back to our analogy of the tools. So the employers may be giving you tools, they're not necessarily teaching you how to use them. And for me, that's the key thing. So yes, I can give you a helpline. Yes, I can give you a day off when you're feeling a bit low. Have you ever had a duvet day? Do you remember that? Some employers, if you don't feel like coming in, you can stay. Is that helping? No. So that's the key thing. Yeah. So not wishing to promote what you do, but having people like you to go into companies to actually give some real life experience to explain how you can use the tools that are out there. And for me, that's the key thing, is to give people time, space to practice the tools.
And that's going to take effort, it's going to take time.
And money for the employer. But to me, it's an investment. So massively. If I look at how much I've cost my employers over the years, it's frightening. It's all about prevention rather than cure again. So teach people how to use the tools.
I mean, we live in a world where people want answers straight away, they want quick fixes, they want magic wands. And it would be great, wouldn't it? You're in a bad place, quickly magic it away and feel better. We know that doesn't work. No matter what potential magic pill comes up next, it's not going to work, basically.
Well,
there's
no silver bullet. And as we said earlier about meds, there's so many meds out there now that some will work for some people, and the same tablet or whatever it is won't work for others. The same with therapies. There's so many different types of therapy now as well, aren't there? Again, some work for some and others.
And it is so important to try to work out what works for that individual. Again, that takes more effort, more time.
It takes time.
And that is, I think, something that has to be recognised. If you want to be happier, if you want to either manage your depression or not go to the extremes, whatever the situation, it's going to take time and effort primarily. It can take money as well, it can take other things, but effort and time. And that is the only answer. The toolbox, you've read the book I have on depression with the toolbox. You've mentioned the toolbox, and it is not only having a huge array of tools that you can go to, and whatever the situation, pick out the one that's suitable for that particular time. It's knowing how to use it. I mean, you could come along and here's a massive toolbox, there you go. If you don't know how to use them, that's not going to be helpful either.
I'm sure you've been on hundreds of these courses in your professional career as well. You go on a course, no matter what it's about, and then you go on the course and you chuck it in the bottom drawer and never think about it again. I mean, we've all got piles of those files, haven't we? Whether it's time management to conflict management or whatever it is, you go. And it's having the opportunity and the space to actually practice using the tool.
No, and my advice, firstly, would be if anyone is in a situation with depression, with anxiety, with whatever condition it might be, recognising it's going to take time and effort. That will be more doable with good support around you. So that you talked about your support network, that will be hugely helpful. But then coming up with your own tools, creating your own toolbox, and then practice. So you become an expert. And in my case, I've mentioned this quite a few times now over the recent years, and also used it in relation to my cancer experience and all of that. And that is probably about 6 years it took of research, reading, practice, applying, getting to a point where I felt extremely confident that I could then I would manage the depression and deal with that situation. I know in your case, it's a very different type of mental health issue. You have a lot less choice around where you go with it. But for me, it was having that confidence to know that recognising any triggers, recognising symptoms, recognising what was potentially going to happen, and then doing about it, and knowing what I could do, going to that toolbox, knowing I could use that tool and apply it.
Yeah.
And that gave huge amounts of confidence to know that I can't ever go down to that place again. And for people who are struggling, particularly with the normal depression, if that's such a thing, if you do take the time and the effort and the practice and keep applying it, you're going to be in a position at some stage where you feel confident you can manage this now.
Building on that, Charlie, what I'd say is it's regular. So I work on it every day.
Yeah.
So I don't just work on it when it starts kicking in.
Yeah.
If by practicing it daily, and I do have things that I do every day just to keep on top of stuff, and that's what I do. So it's regular and often.
Yeah, and that I see so many times, I have done in the past, people in a bad way, they do the things that are helpful and they get better, things improve, and then they feel okay, so they stop doing all those things.
That's bipolar at an extreme. That's bipolar at an extreme.
Okay,
so for example, when I'm on a downer, I'm coming out of it. So this is a dreadful thing to say, but this is what happens: is you never think your depression's going to happen again. So you go into these new relationships, you don't admit it to your new partner or whatever, and then they find out. And a bit like you said earlier on, you don't recognise me as being someone that's down. You attract someone when you're on a bit of a high. You're this energetic, charismatic person, and then all of a sudden you fall off the cliff and they think, wow, this isn't what I signed up to, and they see a completely different side. So how did we get onto that? Okay. I don't know how we got onto that. But
No. I think it's again recognising that it is daily, it's consistency. You can't just stop doing all the things that have helped.
No.
Because then you're going to go back probably to the place you were trying to get away from. So it is, unfortunately, effort, time, practice, support. It's going to help with all of that. But then, if you can do that, certainly in my case, having that confidence, and life is going to throw all sorts at you. You're not going to be happy all the time. It's ridiculous to even think that. But you're then able to deal with situations better. You're
equipped to be able to deal with the humps in the road. That's why
if I think of the amount of things over the last however many years, 6, 7, 8 years, that previously would have put me back down. Yeah. But with the knowledge, with the tools, I've been able to keep it.
It's like anything in it, Charlie. Anything in life is practice. Builds up that memory muscle. Builds up that when things do happen, you've got your stronger memory muscles or whatever to be able to cope. So I can't encourage people more to find what works for them. Yeah. The chisel's not necessarily going to work for them every time, to take the toolbox analogy, but find a tool that's good for the right situation.
And the bigger the range of tools, the more options they've got.
Totally, and practice it. So, and that's what I try and do every day, is practice the tools, the metaphorical tools. Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess you've sort of answered this, but I'm someone who always tries to look for the positives in any situation. So in terms of pretty much your whole life with mental health condition at different times, understanding, not understanding, being okay, not being okay, what are the positives you can take away from your experiences? I know you use it, in what you do with the coaching and helping and the charity work you do, but what other positives are there from what you've been through?
It teaches you a lot of life lessons. It teaches you, as you say, to actually did you say benefits or positives? I can't remember what phrase you used. Positives. Yeah. So positives, it's helped me be me. I'm the only version of me on this planet. Yeah, I want to be the best version of me that I can be. But this is part of me. So I'm open and honest about it now. So the positive side is you say, yes, I can now give back. I haven't always felt I've been able, but I hope I've brought some happiness into people's lives, and I hope I continue to do so and can add value to people's lives, and by giving back, by sharing experiences and what have you. So the benefits, yes, they might have come later on in life, but I now feel I'm in a position to give back and help others, or assist others assist themselves.
And do you recognise that is true? Because you said before about in the bad, the bad place, the self-loathing, the I'm not worth it and I shouldn't be here, all the really negative stuff.
Yeah.
You basically said something which is a complete opposite, and which I see, and most people I'm sure see. Do you see that now?
I do see it, and it's very, very nice to get positive affirmations back. And whereas my previous self would have just pushed those positive affirmations that I've got back, I now just thank people for their lovely comments or whatever. So it's that modesty thing. Is yes, I know, because you can see people grow, and that's why I love what I do, because you can see people grow. I don't want the effort. I don't want the oh, thank you. I don't want that, because I can see it in them, and that's my biggest thing. If I see growth in others, I love that, and that makes every day worthwhile.
Good. Well, I've seen, some small examples where you've helped people, and as I say, the positive impact you have with CYM, the charity, and when you're out on the hikes, and some of the people I know you've coached, I think it's that is fantastic. And as I said before, taking some of the positives out of something that's generally negative, and you used some of that to help is fantastic. So well done. Thank you for this conversation. I'm sure we'll have plenty more conversations.
We will. You can guarantee that.
So thank you very much, Dave. It's been great talking to you. And let's try to help anyone, mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, bipolar, seek help. That's, I think the message is to go and get help. There's lots out there. Talk to people and do the things that are going to help you. Recognise the situation. It's going to take time and effort, but it'll be worth it. So you can go and have a look at the Livedinsights.com website, where there's information there on the results and insights for people like myself, like Dave, who filled in the online questionnaire to see their wisdom, their knowledge, their insights that could be hopefully really helpful. So thanks again, Dave, and we will soon be doing another podcast on a different topic.